Hello, and welcome to Let's Just Talk. I'm your host, Hammi. Today, we are joined by Dr. Pavlick and Dr. Miller to discuss AI and attempt to understand what the hell is happening with our world. Dr. Pavlick here is a professor of computer science at Brown University and a research scientist at Google. And Dr. Netter is a professor in the philosophy department at Brown University and coordinates the computer science department's socially responsible computing program. Dr. Netter, Dr. Pavlick, welcome to Let's Just Talk.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Without further ado, we're just going to jump in. What the hell is going on?
Yeah, so I guess I can start us off by talking a bit about just AI and what's been happening recently. I think, it's kind of been a crazy time in the past couple of years. I think there's been a lot of work in kind of academic research, industry research over the past, many, many years, but especially in the past 5 years on large machine learning models for doing things like generating natural language, generating images and vision. But very recently, these models have become just kind of part available to the public. In particular, OpenAI released ChatGPT, which now anyone can play with very easily. And I think that's really just suddenly gotten everyone interested and excited and maybe nervous about what might be happening soon, just because the kind of reality of really human-like language and really apparently intelligent systems is just like in everybody's living room.
Yeah, I mean, you just said it. People really become aware of it. People become aware of the potential of using AI in all different areas of life, of all different kinds of applications, and people are really impressed with what that technology can do. It's really interesting. People see the benefits, the short-term benefits. We're getting a first sense of pushback as well. So people realizing that these new technologies, they have tremendous utility, but also they raise potential ethical questions. They make us think about the long-term social impacts of using them in all different kinds of applications, ranging from healthcare to credit scores, to in the university applications, using generative AI systems for writing. And I mean, we at the university are talking a lot about ChatGPT and what that means for teaching and learning. So we're thinking about what does that mean for students? What makes uses of this technology good, and when maybe we should be wary of it.
So let's go to that. Since we're students and we're interested in this, ChatGPT, I was doing research that took me about 3 weeks to put together. I was extremely proud of it. Then I found out about ChatGPT and I was like, all right, let me see what the hype is about. Ended up doing my entire 3 weeks research in like less than a minute. So then I was like, why the hell did I just spend 3 weeks trying to do this when I could have just asked this AI system to do it? So, is ChatGPT cheating as professors? Like, where do y'all stand on this?
Yeah, I'm happy to take. So like I think I'm maybe generally a kind of an optimist with the role it plays in education. I wish I remember who I heard this quote from, because I thought it was really nice, but saying that thinking of it kind of like a calculator, but for creative type content or like non-mathematical content. So when you think about the role that a calculator plays in doing something like addition and subtraction, multiplication, basic stuff like that, and then how that would enable people to do more advanced math, to spend your time focusing on the things that can't be easily calculated. So maybe math is not the most relatable, because people who spend time doing, like a lot of people who spend time doing advanced math would appreciate it, but then there's a lot of people who never spend their time doing advanced math. I think actually it's probably a fair analogy, right? So there's a lot of like maybe really basic, I mean, we'll talk later about the limitations. I don't think we're at the point that we really trust to completely outsource like even just basic essay writing to this thing. But let's say we will get there. Let's say that AI will continue to advance and we'll get to the point that we can trust it to give us a factually correct, grounded with citations, like summary of any topic you ask it for. That kind of frees up the incredible intellectual creative capacity of students and professionals to then go do the next thing, right? Like the synthesis, the analysis, make recommendations on what to do with this information. Like presumably if you're being asked to write a report on something, in a university or at a company, it's because then something has to come next and there's going to be some critical thinking and some real risk assessment. The model can kind of help you do that, do more of the more mundane things, but ultimately we're going to want people making those decisions using all of their human values and judgment on that. And so it's kind of freeing to imagine that you could outsource a lot of these types of tasks that are really just a search and aggregation and summarization and distillation, stuff that doesn't require a ton of, what I think humans are really, really good at. So I think there's a lot of potential to basically say, we're raising the bar, like the types of, like on a math exam, you're not just being asked to do really, really long division problems, you're now going to derive some theorems or something. You think about the similar type of things happening in kind of writing and analysis and other kinds of language domains. I think it could be really exciting. I think it could be a really good thing. It could make students spend their time doing the more interesting parts of whatever fields they're working on.
Yeah, I mean, I must say, I'm not a pessimist about the use of that technology in even in educational settings. As Ellie said, I think we're not at the point where we feel that this technology is actually trustworthy enough to allow students to use it as a research tool without critical assessment, and maybe we never should use any of these tools without further critical assessment. So I think I have one concern. I agree with most of what Ellie just said. I think when it comes to work in the humanities, when it comes to research and writing, there is a lot of value also in that process,
Right.
process where you have to do research, where you take ideas, you think about them, you write about them. There's a generative process when you have to actually go through that work of making sense of a paper, not having it somebody explain it to you, break it down to into the main ideas, but you having to do that work yourself. I think this is maybe the math analogy is actually a good one here, because we still teach primary school children how to do addition, how to do division. At some point they get to use a calculator, but we still want people to gain these skills. And then maybe one way of thinking about AI technology like ChatGPT in the classroom is to think of it as a tool that people get to use later on, but you want to make sure that students still learn these critical reasoning skills, that they train them, that they work through them before they start using these tools. So we'll see.
I think 2 follow-up questions. I think the first part of my question was not answered, which is it cheating? And then number 2, my concern is, does it make us, for lack of a better word, dumber as a society if the mundane things, the formation of the ideas, I don't have to think about it. I could just ask an AI tool, like, tell me about this, and it just tells me. How do I format this? And it just tells me. Or write me a paragraph on this, and it just writes it. Is it taking away that process that you described? Because you are right, you can essentially use it in the way that y'all described it, but some of us are not going to use it that way.
Yeah. Yeah, well, so I would say on whether it's cheating, that really gets at what Julia was saying, is like, it depends what the point of the assignment was. If the point of the assignment was to go read the primary text and distill it into points yourself, and you asked ChatGPT to do it, then that was cheating, right? So I think that, but part of this falls on, I think, the professors and the educators to design assignments that ChatGPT can't do, right? Or that you somehow prevent people from using it, right? And there's a whole host of ways that we could think about doing that. But I think in general, like, yeah, there's, I really don't worry about it making us dumber for this same reason. So I think, like, yes, you do definitely want to go to the primary, like, there's a value to going to the primary source, doing the critical analysis yourself, but it's already the case that for anything that we would be assigning to do that on in any of our classes, there's going to be a gazillion written texts that students are going and looking at that, right? Like, I know in CS, people prefer to read blog posts over the original papers, often because the blog posts are clearer. In philosophy, and we do a lot of this in, like, linguistics and semantics, there's Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, excellent resource, often my first stop, and then I go back and read the primary things to kind of prime it. So really, depending on what you're trying to do, it's yet another tool for trying to help you get at the underlying information. I think we shouldn't be judging or deciding some ways of gathering information are better or worse than others, right? This society always moves forward and we advance, and new technology changes the way we do things. I would say most likely we're not going to get dumber. We're probably going to get smarter. There's this standing on the shoulders of giants kind of situation.
Right.
If you have to spend a ton of your time, I mean, what you're talking about, reading the primary source and critically thinking about it is excellent. Realistically, just having been a student myself and seeing how my students work, that's not how they're spending most of their time, right? They're spending their time, if they're doing this kind of research, that they'd be using ChatGPT instead. It's just like clicking through the pages of Google, trying to find the sources. There's some value in that, and you should do it sometimes, but a lot of the time that's not where you're doing the learning, right? You're just wasting a lot of time reading a lot of abstracts and trying to decide if something's relevant, going down a rabbit hole, determining it's not. If you free up the time from doing that, spend time thinking critically. Like, I
Leaves
think there's a
more
lot
time
of
for other
potential,
things.
right, yeah, to say basically, okay, we can do that stuff quickly, and now let's push it, like, we do need a lot more time for this critical thinking, really analyzing stuff, going out and collecting new primary evidence, right? ChatGPT can't do that. It can't go be on the ground in Syria and do firsthand reporting. It can't run experiments in computer science, not yet. Yeah. So there's a lot of value to this.
I just want to make a point that you briefly alluded to. I think we, as instructors, we need to make sure that we create the right kinds of assignments. And I think many of the assignments that right now ChatGPT can just do easily, they're often bad assignments.
Right. If students have often been kind of BSing their way through them anyway, right?
Exactly. So now it's even easier. But if you make an assignment that actually is interesting, of interest to students, that is also in many ways applied, where they have to. I mean, in philosophy, we often do this. We talk about many different ideas, theories, approaches to a particular topic, and then what students are usually most engaged with, and where I think they learn most, is if they then get to apply this to their own, to some context that they can relate to, something that's happening at Brown, some case study, and these are the things that where they actually have to break down the ideas, where they can't really just string some sentences to each other and make something that sounds plausible, but they actually have to apply things, and these are the things that ChatGPT doesn't do very well right now.
Right.
Thank you. And so pivoting away from the educational aspects, there was this AI tool that was hot a couple of months ago where people would upload pictures of themselves and then it would produce what they would look like if they were like in Game of Thrones or something like that. But I forgot what it's called. That takes us to privacy and security. How do we ensure that AI tools are not violating our privacy and security? Like all this information that we're inputting in these AI tools, where is it going? Who owns it? What do they do with it?
It's an excellent question, and I think I can kind of talk about technical stuff, and then I'd love to hear Julie's opinions on the ethics and how to avoid this. So, I mean, the short answer right now is like there is really no guarantee of privacy right now. So, from my understanding, almost anything you type into these models is being saved and probably used to retrain the models and things like that. I've heard informally that people like who work in the government were told, do not try using ChatGPT on your projects because everyone wants to, but then that means possibly classified information is being entered in and stored on OpenAI servers, right? So one main thing is like, just legally, there's not currently rules, guidelines, constraints around what the models or what the companies who own these systems can do with the data that's entered in. I think most of these companies right now, at least, they're trying to be good, right? They're not going to just like quickly take that and tie your IP address to it and sell it to advertisers or something, but like nothing formally prevents them. The other big risk, and I think this is kind of gets on the technical side, is we have like very, very little understanding of how the models work under the hood, and so I'm not aware of anything that can guarantee the model won't regurgitate information you put in later, right? So a good example is like if somewhere it reads like your phone number or address, or you enter it in, like if I wanted to ask it, like my husband and I were talking about doing some basement remodeling, right? So I was like, I'm going to try to use ChatGPT. I haven't tried using it. I've been saying I'm going to try it on this. Like, can it help me find contractors and people like in, so like say I put in my address for that, right? To be like, I want within 10 miles of here or something. Like it could be that 5 years down the road, it can spit out my address to somebody who I've never heard of, right? Like that's not something I want it to have happen. And I'm pretty sure we have no idea how to guarantee it doesn't do that, right? Like the models are very, even with a lot of safeguards in place, you can hack them in various ways to get them to spit out information that they weren't supposed to spit out. And so I think just we're very, very far from being able to place anything that looks like a guarantee on model behavior. We can basically test them heavily and say we haven't seen them do anything bad, and then they get pushed out of the boundaries of where we've tested them, and suddenly they go rogue. Like we saw this with Bing's chatbot, which kind of went crazy once it was engaged in a conversation that lasted 2 hours when it's used to only talking in these 5-minute chats or something. And so yeah, I think for security and privacy, it's something we should definitely be thinking about. And right now, I think the technology is not in a place where we can be like, say anything with certainty, the way we've traditionally been able to if we talk about things like.
So not only do
cryptography.
we not fully know how these systems work, we also don't have the right policies and laws in place
Right,
to prevent.
right. I think it needs
companies-
to be fought on two fronts, right? There's like a technological front of just being able to guarantee stuff, and then there's a legal front of being able, or of saying what do we expect, what should we demand, and there's I'm sure a ton of ethics.
Yeah, there's of course, you could talk for a long time about the ethics underlying privacy, the idea of privacy. Where do we want privacy? Where do we need privacy? Do we have a right to privacy? I think what I want to talk about here is I think a slightly different angle, because when you talk to people and you talk to people about giving up their data in all kinds of contexts. I mean, this is just one instance of us providing very personal data on the internet to companies, to online services. I mean, search Google would probably be the closest equivalent to this, and people are very happy to hand over their data. So and people are very bad at reasoning about the potential impacts, the potential risks and threats that result from them giving up this kind of privacy, because we are, turns out, very bad at thinking about long-term threats. So I mean, people maybe are sometimes concerned about say identity theft. They are concerned about people getting their address, personal information about them, and what if that gets stored, what if that gets leaked. People can relate to that. But what people are very bad at is reasoning about more longer term threats. So what does it mean if that kind of data is being stored about me long term? Who else might get access to it? What is, do I mind if do I mind the fact that I am being observed, that I'm making myself into a kind of person that can be read by others, that is becoming more transparent, and does that change our behaviors in some situations? So this is a very long-winded way of saying that people don't really reason about this, which is why I think when we think about privacy in these services, maybe this is a chance for not putting that into the hand, that choice into the hand of individuals. And
So people may be bad at reasoning, but it's also because it makes their lives extremely easier. And, because what am I going to do? Not put an address into Google Maps to try to get from point A to point
Totally,
B.
yeah.
And so it's like we want to put the onus on people to be like, we as consumers are bad at this, but these services are such integral parts of our lives now that like I can't imagine. I don't know a world without the internet.
Right.
So,
Absolutely, and I think that's what Julia was saying is maybe this isn't something we should ask individuals to be the ones responsible for this. Yeah.
For protecting yourself.
So then it's like, what is a potential threat or two that like we don't think about when we're like signing away all our rights to these companies?
Right. I mean, one threat I think we are not seeing, that's a very very immaterial threat, is this idea that we are getting used to being observed. We're basically getting used to becoming machine readable in certain ways. So and why is that a threat? So you could say, well, that's just what it is. I mean, companies have my data. They can analyze me. They can create profiles about me. They can do targeted advertising. All these things that are already happening.
Right.
I think that the threat, where this becomes a threat beyond people being comfortable or uncomfortable about this personalization, is if at some point you have institutions, governments who are actually who want to draw on that data, who have a vested interest in actually in people being very comfortable with being observed, being very comfortable with giving up information and allowing others to profile them. Right now, government is probably, I mean, not doing this at scale. I mean, for sure they are interested in individuals here and there, but you can think about a long-term perspective where that is
Scary.
where that is scary when people just are just used to that.
Right, because I would add. So I think Like when we think about things like election manipulation, that's like a really clear use case of something like this. Like I, for one, love targeted ads. I like most of the things I buy so many toys for my daughter. They know exactly what I want. And I'm like annoyed when I see things that aren't. So I'm perfectly fine. I'm like, oh no, this is convenient. But of course, for something like information seeking, one would hate to think that it might become impossible for you to find the information that somebody hasn't decided is the information you want, right? Like we need the equivalent of a library where these are all the books. You go, anyone can look at all the books, right? If we have if everything is on the internet and things are increasingly customized, and what we have with something like a model like ChatGPT, I mean, this is on a trajectory that we've been on since things like Google and Google Search and the other ways we've been gathering information, Facebook and social media. It's already become like not quite the library. But when we use these like full AI models where there's not even like a list of links, they're not necessarily tied to the original sources, it becomes even harder to verify who's getting what information, why are they getting that information, and what information are they not getting, or like could we even make a guarantee that they could in principle access that information, whereas perhaps they couldn't. So that kind of, it just becomes this much more unwieldy mess. And when we're already dealing with these issues about, for example, being having your personal opinions and beliefs swayed by the stuff you're reading, getting an even bigger, more unwieldy black box into the mix is something that should give us pause, and we shouldn't be in a rush to implement.
To add to that, I know there's some AI tools that also have the capacity to make deep fake videos, audio, and pictures of people.
Right.
So, like, things like that, how do we discern reality from what is made up?
Yeah.
If like I can see this picture, this video, this audio, and say, oh yeah, that's definitely Hammi.
Right.
There's no way Hammi did not do that thing.
Right.
Yeah. I think that we are facing one of the biggest threats that we are facing when it comes to this new capacities to generate information, to generate text, to generate images, is the information landscape we live in. So, and I think this also ties in to what we just talked about. This idea of you can both use very detailed data about people and target them, say in an election campaign, figuring out what is it that would tick that person's boxes. What would it take to get them to vote for a particular candidate? But then you can also tailor. It's very easy to tailor that messaging to that particular person. If it becomes easier to actually generate text, to generate ads, it doesn't even have to be deceptive. But I think we are facing a future in which we are targeting people, and where it's becoming increasingly easy to target people. And that, I think the worry I have is that we are facing an information environment that is fractured, where people get to see what they want to see, what others think they want to see and want to hear. And they're not seeing, as Ellie just said, they're not necessarily seeing what else is out there. You're not necessarily seeing sources. This is not annotated. There's no provenance to this necessarily.
Yeah, and I think that's so. This is so interesting because, like, we're talking, like, what I think you and I started talking about was just like, even when you're not taking in deliberate misinformation, like taking that into account, there's big risks to just like the targeting, even within the realm of things that are true, but just, picking what is shown. There's a whole different risk when you take into account the just blatant fabrication, right? Making a video of you saying something that you never said. And I think something I've been thinking about recently, I think is really interesting, because I heard somebody mention, like, that we talk about like technology natives being kids who were born into a world where, like, kids who are born in the past 10 years and just like social media and the internet is just there from the beginning, right? So like we're millennials, you're probably younger than millennial. And so like we kind of remember like learning technology, like it was very early, but we still kind of remember the before times, and you can kind of translate into it. Whereas younger generations just grew up with that, and as a result, they have a fundamentally different worldview, and they can see the potential of technology and also the risks, and it just kind of changes the kind of social fabric. Somebody mentioned the idea of maybe having these AI natives, like kids who just grow up in a world where real versus fake is something that is like really hard to distinguish. You're used to being observed all the time. I think part of it is we just need to wait. Like, we should be cautious because we don't know what the long-term consequences are, what these younger generations, how they might receive information, how they might think about the world. If something like that, like there's no real way to tell without seeing it firsthand yourself what is true and what is false, like that could have real consequences on the way society is,
And to move from that topic a little bit, let's jump into the space of warfare and cyber attacks. What is
Let's go
happening
there,
with
yeah.
that?
I mean, I hope we will be very cautious before implementing that, right? I think this is the kind of thing where until we're really understanding it, it's scary to automate the decision making about, is this person the person you think it is, right? That kind of stuff. It's like ethically quite ambiguous, right? Because there's a potential for it to actually save lives in terms of just net number of people who are killed if you can do this precision stuff. But I think when it's a big unknown, I just hope that the government's not rushing to deploy AI on things like in warfare settings in the way that I think we're thinking of it, like automatically going in, finding the person, taking them out. Cyber attacks are a whole different thing, like the threats of seizing. I don't know. I guess maybe I'll let you chime in as more of the ethics person who might have spent more time thinking about it.
No, I mean, I think what you talked about, using AI in actual physical conflict situations. I think that it is happening when it comes to target selection. When it usually these systems, as far as I'm aware, are mostly still human in the loop systems, or at least human on the loop systems. So you haven't taken the decision making out of the hands of humans, which is also important from a legal perspective, from an international law perspective, where it's very important to maintain chains of accountability, where ultimately you need to be able to say, well, who is that? Somebody needs to be responsible for a decision that has been made. If, especially if you in a military conflict, you're harming civilians, you are harming non-combatants. There needs to be somebody who is responsible. And if you remove that, the big danger of if you remove humans from that system entirely, which I think right now is not the case, but of course people are talking about this. Then you will run into very fundamental ethical problems of conflict and the ethics of war. So I think that's a very, very important thing to talk about long term when we think about deploying these systems in physical combat situations. But I mean, cyber attacks, this is I think a lot of conflict, international conflict, is not waged on
the ground. Yeah.
On the ground, I mean, it is. You see the war in Ukraine. You see that it very much is. But a lot of these conflicts are somewhat more latent.
Technological.
Yeah. And this is where I think it gets back to the kind of thinking of long-term risks of your personal information stuff, right? So like the kind of thing one could imagine in this setting is, I mean, we already get stealing of personal information, things like what do they call it, where they kind of hold hostage? I'm blanking on the term for, there's a word for this particular type of attack, and I don't know why I'm just drawing a blank, where they kind of like freeze you out of all your systems and say, we're going to leak personal information and we won't.
I know it is a term, but I...
Yeah, so like there's a lot of these types of attacks, and I think you can imagine that definitely happening at scale, like you're locked out of your banking system or whatever. Yeah. I do think these are already real risks, so I'm not sure the current AI systems are not the reason we have these risks, but one reason that we might imagine, if we play it forward and say the types of systems that underlie ChatGPT are widely deployed in a ton of different settings, it could make these risks more serious unless we really understand how they work under the hood, which we currently don't, right? So doing things like trying to guarantee certain types of security for these types of systems would be much harder than the systems we currently have. Like right now, my understanding is most of the systems we currently have are hacked because of human error, right? People have bad passwords and stuff like that. But on actual, I have terrible passwords. I actually have great passwords, but I use them over and over.
They didn't hear that. I have great passwords.
Great passwords. I think if we were to have like these kinds of AI systems, it's not like we have the equivalent of like cryptography where we can say, well, unless there's a human error, there's a, more than the number of atoms in the universe chance of whatever, or lower than. Like we would be going away from that, and we would be like, maybe it won't sell your personal information if asked nicely by a antagonistic government. Like like it's just we really can't place those guarantees. So I think this risk comes greater.
Can I bring up one risk that relates to misinformation? I think a lot of conflict, international conflict, is
Information
is
warfare.
information warfare.
Yeah.
So undermining a political system in a target country, you can do that by introducing misinformation, disinformation, I would say, so because it's targeted, by making people less trusting of particular sources of information. We know that if people once people get suspicious, once people have been fed misinformation, it's very easy for them to get dragged into echo chambers, and once you're in that position, you are, even if you're confronted with trustworthy information, you may not believe it because it no longer fits your worldview. So
And you have an easy out, which is you see trustworthy information, and that might have been faked too. Once
Exactly, you
anything
don't
could
know.
be faked, it's very easy to dismiss whatever.
Yeah.
is
and
in-
that's all it takes. You don't have to believe the disinformation. You just need to be in a situation where you go like, yeah, I no
So-
longer believe anything.
So like there's a huge issue with accountability that I'm hearing. And then we also talk about ethics, but we haven't talked about whose ethics are we applying to these systems. You know, what I may see as ethical may not be what somebody else from the other side of the world see as ethical. And then in high-stake spaces like healthcare and criminal justice systems that may be reliant or using AI, how do we ensure accountability in those spaces?
Yeah, there's great questions, and Suresh, who's in CS, is like the right person. He spends a lot of time thinking about this kind of thing. I was just talking to him the other week about it. I mean, especially for these kinds of applications, so criminal justice is a really good example where like we know that AI systems are bad here, right? They routinely make the wrong decisions, and that was for much simpler systems that we presumably controlled more. We have no reason to believe the better systems, the more advanced systems will be better, and in fact we have some reason to believe they might make the problem worse, right? So I think there are certain domains, criminal justice is one of these, healthcare is one of these, where we know there are kind of systematic biases in which populations get which types of outcomes, and we should just be very hesitant to deploy these systems in those cases, right? Like I think there's work on trying to improve it, but it shouldn't be the kind of thing where we deploy it and then also try to improve it as we go, like until we really know what's going on and until we have some confidence they're not going to have these problems. And like I said, I think this is not a new problem. This is like a problem that's existed for the early machine learning systems and probably it's definitely not getting better, could be getting worse.
I think there's a point. So it's sometimes when you deploy there's an issue when you deploy systems in like this that are somewhat black box systems in situations, in contexts where people have a right to demand accountability, to get justifications as to why a particular decision was made in a particular way, and that criminal justice is an obvious example. But you also use these systems in determining credit ratings, in determining allocation of other kinds of resources.
I've seen them in hiring decisions.
Hiring, exactly.
Really common, yeah.
So
And then humans are designing them, so whatever biases they have when they're making those
Totally.
codes and algorithms get
Yeah.
inputted into these systems.
Absolutely.
and also the training data. So usually when you train these systems on the basis of a set of inputs and outcomes, and ultimately these systems they are designed to replicate those. And if you have systematic biases in that data, well, you will see that in the outputs, and that is something we need to be really careful about. Of course, the problem is lots of people are thinking about this. They're thinking about, well, how can we make sure that we get better data, that the data is not fundamentally biased. But sometimes the tricky bit is that we don't know what an unbiased reality would look like, because we can't. We can't, if we knew that, well, then we could make other changes in the first place.
Right. There's definitely questions that are not at all technical questions, right? That probably we need some clarity around those before we think about what the technical solution is. And then just to get kind of even more in the maybe weeds of the newer technical systems, I think one of the issues we're dealing with is like, we think of machine learning, it's a lot about kind of probabilistic. So if you're training on old data, you think about something like hiring. If this is a firm that's only hired like white upper middle class men in the past, and you train it on successful hires in the past, it's only going to hire people like that in the future, right? Like that's, and it might not be directly that, but it might have really strong correlates. Like we're looking for people who graduated from Harvard, right? And then like historically, and this might have some biases, right? So, but it can be even worse with the newer systems because they're not even like cleanly probability models. So it's not necessarily the case that we would expect the distribution of outcomes to just reflect the probability distribution of the input. We don't, they're black boxes. And so they could learn some kinds of weird tricks and associations that we didn't fully anticipate that they learned, and that we might not recognize that they learned until they've made a bad decision repeatedly, and only after the fact we're like, oh, duh, it did some dumb thing, but the damage is done, right?
And then 2 questions. There was another hot thing on social media where this AI system was like, I want to be a person, or wants to have personhood, and everybody was like, oh, it's the end of the world. So at some point, would there be conversations about giving legal personhoods to AI systems? Because companies under the Supreme Court already have personhood status. So that's a whole nother conversation. But what's your take on that? And then the second question is for you. You work at Google. Will Google be obsolete? Or what is Google doing to compete in this market? Because the other day I was trying to research something on Google. There was like 20 links. I had to click on them and read through all of these different documents and like click on other links that send me to other links, and I'm just like, this is taking too long. Go to ChatGPT, ask the same question, and it's just like, here's the answer you're looking for. And I'm like, why would I spend, hours of my day on Google researching something when this other system can just provide the same answer in minutes?
So I guess, how should we take those?
You could take the Google, or
I
you
will
could take
take
the
the
person.
sentience question.
Yeah.
I will take the sentience question.
Or you
so-
can exchange. It's up to y'all.
So should we give rights to systems that basically give us the impression that they are human-like, that they can
insist.
communicate, they and they even insist that they are. I am very skeptical about this because I think the probably the easiest way of putting this is to say that something that looks like and talks like a human just gives you that basically creates the impression of human-like behavior. This impression doesn't allow us to then conclude that it is actually human. So just because something creates the impression that it understands something, that something that looks like it's the output of a sentient, feeling, reasoning human being who understands something, doesn't mean that the system actually understands anything. I mean, these systems are, as Ellie said, they are all the systems are more probabilistic, but ultimately they are still just they are not understanding anything. There's no I in this system. There's no sentience, no subjectivity as such. Of course, you can argue against this if we want to get into the weeds of this. Is where do we know that this is not the case? That the things that we are creating, that these black boxes, that we are not creating something like subjectivity. Maybe we can't. I mean, can I say for sure? Probably not. But it is unlikely, and it's a fallacy to just say, okay, we just because it looks and talks like a human, it has the attributes. And
So walks like a duck, quacks like a duck.
Doesn't mean that
It's
it's a duck.
usually is duck, but you're saying it's not a duck.
It doesn't mean that you can't. The reverse is not true. It doesn't mean that it is a duck. I can also create a plastic toy that gives the impression of being a duck, and it wouldn't.
Right, and it's good to think, so for something like this Things chatbot that said all this stuff, it's good to remember that it's read a whole lot of sci-fi and fan fiction on the internet, right? It's not like it generated this by itself, and you can tease that out of it. And so a lot of the times it looks human-like because it's been trained on what humans say, and it's regurgitating a lot of that. So I can kind of talk about what is the kind of future of search? What are the companies that are going to be big players? I mean, I think exactly what you're saying. I think everyone's kind of aware of the paradigm shift this might pose for the traditional search engine. I can say Google and all other companies are actively working on it, right? And I think it's really hard to anticipate what's going to happen in the next couple of years in terms of who are going to be the leaders. I can say that Google has technology very, very similar to this, and they've been releasing BART and showed some examples of this kind of stuff, right? So it's not and actually have had it for a while. The question is really about these other issues that we're talking about that I think are making some of the bigger companies more conservative about what to release, right? So when you see something like the Bing chatbot go rogue, that's the kind of thing that people are nervous about having happen. So like I said, that I'm sure Bing did not intend for that to be the behavior, but they tested it in what they probably considered a typical search setting, and that did not include a reporter doing psychotherapy on the chatbot for 2 hours, right? And then it's like, oh, didn't think of that. So I think there's going to be a lot of that in the next coming years as people are trying to kind of figure out the parameters of this.
Yeah.
And then it's really hard to say what companies will lead and which ones won't. Like, I'm just really curious to see, like, we could see a massive disruption. We could also see something where it's like there's kind of spawning up a lot of companies trying to come to, and sometimes this happens, the existing big companies still come to the top of the pack, right? Like, you don't really know what's going to happen. I think it's like an interesting thing to watch. But yeah, I think there's going to just be a ton of movement in the next couple of years as people figure out how much do we want to use these systems, how much do we not want to, like from a user interface standpoint, they're excellent. There's all of these other risks, so like where is that sweet spot where we get the benefits and not all of the risks?
And then pivoting to, because we're nearing towards the end, for jobs, people who are worried about AI replacing and taking away their jobs. What is your take on that? Is there anything that we can do to ensure that we're not creating these things that are supposed to be benefiting society, but in turn ends up hurting, you know, a group of people who we didn't anticipate making them for?
Right. Right. I mean, yeah, I think this is also one of these things where there should be discussion both on the technical side and the non-technical side to be figuring out what is the right solution. I think I don't foresee like super massive replacements and things like it. Definitely, if we're responsible and we're introducing them cautiously, at least in the immediate term, like they shouldn't just be like replacing whole sectors of society. Like it would be really dumb to just fire, you know, all of the white collar workforce and replace it with ChatGPT. We would be in a dire situation. So I hope no one is considering doing that. But realistically, like with online technology, there will be this gradual shift where some jobs will be automated and others will be created. And so I think we need to be thinking about the same things we always be thinking about, which is like job retraining and replacement, making sure our education is preparing people for what will be a dynamic workforce, not a particular job, right? So we don't want people graduating with degrees in how to prompt engineer ChatGPT when ChatGPT might not be the technology, right? Like, or similar for any other profession, right? So we want to make sure that we have, you know, good support for people who are working between. So I think there's a lot of social structure that needs to happen. There's technological things that need to happen. I don't think it's a time for mass panic, but it's with anything being level-headed and thinking about consequences and making sure we're like ready for when that reality comes rather than like surprised when stuff happens.
I mean, all of that, I think this is a very old question that we faced since the Industrial Revolution in a way, that people have been worried that jobs will disappear, and jobs have disappeared, and the work environments have changed. People do different things. What we've also seen is have seen an increase in leisure time. I mean, people used to work 6, sometimes 7 days a week. We're now used to a 2-day weekend. And in a way, in the long term, what I could see happen, I think all the things, Ellie, that you said are true. We need to think about how to keep people open to and able to take on new responsibilities to change the way they work. But also we should think about what it might mean to have to also work less if we don't have to work that much.
Excellent, yes.
That would be good.
Yeah.
And then before we get your final thoughts on the issue, the developing world. So if us on this side of the world are making all these advancements and, you know, moving forward with AI technology, where other places around the world don't even have access to broadband internet, how do we think about those who are left behind? Is this an opportunity for them to catch up using these tools and systems, or essentially are we just focusing on the us and leaving the rest behind?
That's a great question.
This is a complicated question. But what I would say is what we need to be careful about is to not leave big companies to to actually take over those and shape those technological developments in, say, in the developing world. I think that we're seeing that. We're seeing, for example, Facebook creating broadband internet infrastructure in developing countries, but also then shaping the way people access the internet, because they often then offer plans where people can offer access the internet through Facebook in a cheap way, and that shapes how people can use the technology, and then basically shapes it on Facebook's terms. So I think we need to be really, really careful about who gets to push that development, and maybe be bit careful about just letting commercial interests do this. So this is I think this is a question that we need to address on a international level.
Yeah, I would completely agree. I think this is like the decisions are made by people who are in the room, and right now most of the room is American-based big tech companies, and I think there's a huge role for academia, for government, for other people, especially people who are kind of technologically savvy, but they're primarily not software engineers, computer scientists, but they're thinking about all of these other things. So yes, I think making sure people aren't left behind should be a very high priority. I hear people at big tech companies and who are successful who are interested in doing it, but of course you only have your own worldview, so they don't necessarily know how to do it, right? It's like people are like, oh, we can go save the world. Like that's a genuine interest that people want to do, but their idea for how to do it might have repercussions that they're not anticipating. So I think widening the group of people who are discussing it, I think there's appetite for it. Like I think there's room, like people want to not do this the wrong way. But
you need to bring in the stakeholders.
But you need more than to just not want to mess it up.
What is your take on AI art? Is it theft or is it creativity?
Yeah, I mean, I wish we had a true artist somewhere, someone from RISD who could talk about this. I mean, I think similar to the other things we were talking about, technology, there's a real conversation to be had about things like copyright law, making sure that we're not that models aren't exploiting artists, and making sure they're getting a share of whatever money is to be made from this. But there's also that potential for it to be a really exciting tool. So like just said, something like a camera, like we could say something like when we invented the cameras, then this somehow like diminishes art because we don't have people don't have a need for photorealistic painting or something anymore. But then you can see of all the other things that have exploded as consequence that there's a whole art of photography. There's also all the kinds of other painting that abstract expressionism and stuff that maybe came about when people were like, we don't need to do photorealistic stuff. I think it'll be an exciting thing to see. I hope that I don't see that there wouldn't be a role for artists. I would almost say there's going to be, as society changes, there's more of a role for artists to comment and bring to light the issue, right? Like the role of AI in society is something we need artists to help us get clarity on. So I'm optimistic there.
I would like to talk to an artist about this, but my take on this is it theft? It's tricky. I mean, if it undermines artists' capacity to thrive, to make a living, and if it devalues art that is created by people, that's something to be concerned about. Another thing I'm interested in, I would be interested to hear what an artist has to say about this, but I'm interested in the role of creativity, because in a way these systems, what they are, ultimately they are regurgitating what other artists have done in remixing it, but an interesting thing, one thing that artists do is they actually come up with views of the world, ways of seeing the world that we have never thought about.
Absolutely.
This breaking the mold in a way that still makes sense, but is transgressive. And I wonder if we are.
I agree. So like the like pretentious cocktail party thing is like everything is derivative. Like this is everything that these AIs produce will be derivative, right? They're not gonna. So it's always going to be like, oh, this is kind of like just stealing some idea from these other people. Like they're not going to that kind of role of art is like really makes us reflect and think on something. Like, there's like the social commentary type of thing. Like these models would have never done a Banksy thing on their own accord. Maybe now they would if given the right. But like it's like that kind of thing that gets you, that kind of like makes people think and talk, right? That they're just gonna mash together some ideas. So yeah, I don't see them replacing the need for artists. Like I think there'll be more of a need for artists, or as much as ever. But I do think there's a real conversation about making sure artists are getting the financial reward for that, right? So I think there's going to be a role for figuring out where that line is. That's where we need, basically you need to do another one of these with artists and
Okay.
legal people to talk about that.
My painters, photographers, videographers, creatives, fashion designers, I'm going to get them all in a room and be like, all right, what's your take on AI art?
Yeah.
Let's talk about it.
Yeah.
And then lastly, in 1 minute, what do you want to send us away with? Some words of wisdom in this world of AI and what the future looks like.
I'll say something and I'll give you the last word. I mean, I would say this was a ton of like talking about the risks and all the bad things. I think fundamentally I'm optimistic and excited right now, right? I think there's a really good opportunity. One thing that is really exciting to see is how quickly after the technology is up there, people are asking these questions, right? So I think we've, like, especially younger people are very interested in this. Like, we've just seen a lot of bad decisions be made, so that like right away the first thing people are asking is, how is this going to have negative social impacts? How should we be thinking about where it's not deployed? What about the development? Like, those are the first things that we're asking, whereas in other technologies, it's been like only after 50 years of them being deployed when we've looked back at bad effects and we're like, oh, maybe we did that wrong. So I think that basically, like, as soon as the technology is there, already people are asking the right questions. So that makes me optimistic that we hopefully won't royally F this up, and that actually we could be in a good position.
To latch onto this, I think I'm also not a pessimist when it comes to these things. I would say we need to keep asking these questions, and we also need to integrate that that kind of thought, that kind of criticism into the creation of these technologies. So these are the conversations that the engineers, the product designers need to have when they are thinking about, well, what are we going to build? What might it be used for? Can we preempt that? How does that shape the way in which we build the technology? So we need to have that at the very beginning amongst engineers and in society. But when it's happening, increasing
doing
scale,
it.
which is good. So.
Yeah, personally, I'm extremely excited about what the future holds because it just makes my own life easier, and I'm excited about like the potential of what could be, and all the exciting new stuff that are going to be built. So engineers, scientists, computer scientists, thank you. But thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to continuing these conversations with you.
Thank you.